In the early phases of the spiritual journey, when the quest becomes conscious and deliberate and serious, the approach tends to be divided among 4 personality types, we could say. Not the personality strategies that the ego applies so much, but there are people oriented toward action. And their motivation is immediately to do something, to achieve something on the physical level, make something happen. And they will be involved in whatever, acquiring land for an ashram, or building a church, or a mosque, or a temple, or writing a book, or doing something to spread the word and to create conditions for their own spiritual growth and perhaps for others. Perhaps they'll just leave their job and move to the country and focus like Thoreau did at Walden Pond on his own self's inner life. Whatever, it'll be an active approach. Service. And then there are those whose approach is more devotional, the bhakti types, who will be more interested in prayer and in devotional activities. Could be going to church and or going to the Hindu temple and doing pujas and supporting the work of monks and priests and participating in holidays and events, going on their knees into the cathedral of the Virgin of Guadalupe, all those kinds of activities that humble the ego and bring it into a more devotional relation to God. And then there are the meditative types who say, no, I just want to sit and practice going deep within, and I don't want to know anything about external practices or action or even prayer. I just want to try to find out what is the meaning of I, or however the quest is formulated. And then there are the jnani types who will want to read up on it, read everything they can on comparative religion. What do the Buddhists think? What are the mystical Christians talking about? What are the deepest philosophical understandings of the nature of reality? And they will get caught up in those metaphysical structures and edifices that they hope will lead to ever higher levels of perception and clarity. As one goes further on the path, the division really begins to break down not into 4 but just into 2, and one is the feeling of the capacity to do it oneself, the sense that I know I am one with God. I will realize the gyana as an act of will to silence the mind, and I won't depend on any external sources of authority or of help or of internal. And then the bhakti approach is I surrender to God. And so when one comes to an approach like that of Sri Ramana, in which the very direct path is offered, then one either tends to think, all right, I'll do Atma Vichara, I will ask who am I, and that's it. and nothing else need to be done. And I won't worry about action, because prarabdha karma is determined anyway. Whatever shall be, ke sara sara. And I'll focus entirely on the Atma Vichara and investigate this question of who am I. But then the bhakti type says, no, I can't do that. I can't concentrate, really. I can't reach this, or it's too abstract, or I don't get it on that level. But what I can do is surrender to God. I'll surrender my life to God. And what they generally mean by that is a surrender of one's bodily life in the beginning. In other words, I'll do what is necessary to follow the Dharma. I will lead as sattvic a life as possible. Or I'll dedicate myself in service in some very formal way. Or I'll join a community that's dedicated to such an approach, and I'll surrender to God and Guru and Dharma and Sangha, and take refuge with the Buddha, whatever the approach is. But it will be a partial surrender, because although the bodily life will be surrendered, and perhaps speech will be surrendered, which is a much more subtle and difficult sadhana. In other words, if I'm surrendered to God, then my words should always be about God. I shouldn't talk about anything else. There shouldn't be any small talk. Shouldn't be any vulgar speech. There shouldn't be any gossip. There shouldn't be any ego undermining of other people's quest for the purity of heart, of God consciousness. I mustn't let my Maya leak out to others. I shouldn't talk about my doubts and my fears and my confusions to other people, so they don't mimic it, and I don't create psychic contagion and undermine the morale of others who are on the quest. All of those aspects of the hygiene of speech will become part of one's service, one's surrender to God. One won't use speech as an instrument of the ego any longer, but as an instrument to remind oneself and others of why we're here, and of the presence of God that should always be motivating our actions and our words. But then what happens is that at a very much more refined and profound level of the search, it becomes clear that the only real surrender is of the mind itself. Any other surrender is just a superficial outward, and often it can be a hypocritical approach. Because, you can speak all the right words, and you can do all the right philanthropic things, and you can get up for 4 a.m. meditation and do all of that, but inside you're thinking about all kinds of Maya. And the mind is not willing or able to remain focused on pure awareness. And so the one who is doing self-investigation discovers the same thing. I'm trying to do Atma Vichara, but the thoughts are wandering. The thoughts are going in other directions. There's distraction. There isn't this continuous, unbroken remembrance of I am I. And not remembrance as a thought, but as the realization of that. It's not happening, you see. So when one reaches that point, then there is no longer any difference between surrender and Atma Vichara. They are the same. And it comes down to one's will to surrender all of one's thoughts. Okay, because, and going to the very root thought, the very I thought that creates and sustains the ego, that itself must be offered to the silent presence that is pure awareness. Nothing else counts but that. And if that isn't done, then really all the other efforts were in vain, because the ego will simply create another dream and forget about it at some point with the death of the body, and the karma will not end. However, it may be that in the next life, because of all of that good karma that one did, one will be born into a dream that's very opportune for completing the journey. But that's another dream. We don't want to put off to another dream and all of those unknown chances or lack thereof to what can be gained now. So at some point it becomes very clear. Nothing else really counts in this spiritual journey except the complete, constant offering of the I thought until it is incinerated in the fire of yoga, the fire of the union of waking attention with the pure awareness that destroys the ego and brings the rebirth as the manifestation of the self. Or you could say the unmanifestation of the self, because one will no longer be identified with manifest form, but with that formless presence that is transcendent of all manifestation, but will appear in the manifest dream to others, to those who seek. So it is this realization that the two are one, the Atma Vichara and the self-surrender, which can only happen through love. It can't happen just through some intellectual curiosity. It's not going to happen through willpower alone. It's not going to happen through any other force or good karma. It's not going to happen as a result of how much money one gave to charity or donated to an ashram or any of those things. They'll help. All of that helps because it shows the one's willingness to make a sacrifice. And the more one is willing to sacrifice at the partial level of body, of speech, of money, of time, of energy, of goodwill, of all of those forms, the more sattvic one's ego becomes, and the more the sanskara of sacrifice then leads to the final ability to sacrifice the I thought itself, one's dearest treasure, and let go of the fear of the loss of everything that entails to the ego. The loss of your free will, your options to decide to do something else with your life, all of that the especially postmodern ego is so reluctant to give up and to make a commitment toward anything, let alone a commitment that's going to require the elimination of the ego that makes that commitment. So this is a very rare capacity for total self-sacrifice, and it is that and that alone that enables the investigation of the I thought to be continuous and to therefore be able to pierce through the plane of representation of the I into the I itself, the eye of the needle, the eye of Shiva, the I that is the I from which God sees. And that I we can only be. We cannot look at it from an objective perspective. You can never see God except by being that. And that means you can't be anything else like an ego. And so the plane of thought must be traversed and pierced into the realization, and then thought then as an egoic construct never again appears. Thought emerges from the silence when service of those seekers is required, but the thought happens not with any egoic intention, but as a spontaneous outflowing of body and mind from which the self has now transcended and is no longer identified with anything that happens in the apparent world. Because the apparent world is no longer an apparent world to the self. It is simply the self itself. That's all. There is no other. And it's this shift of perception by perceiving through the eye of Shiva that changes everything. And one lives no longer in time, but in the eternal present. And what lives is not a person, but simply a pure awareness that is nowhere and everywhere, and is simply absolute love, absolute blissful love that has no motivation, no desire, no fear, and no internal movement, stillness, which is one of the reasons why that living symbol Arunachala was given to Sri Ramana, because the word itself, Aruna, is the light of the eye of Shiva, and Achala is the unmoving stillness that enables that light to be revealed. And so each of us must become the living symbol of Arunachala Shiva, the supreme and only self, through the total surrender of the ego mind and its core thought of I am this body into the real I that is not a thought and not an object of any kind, but the blissful awareness that is absolute and ever present and ever shining with its own light of love. This is what we are. This is what we are now. And it can only be found now, in the present that transcends time. It cannot be found by the ego trapped in time, believing in time, and it won't have enough time to achieve its own transcendence if it believes that it is something that must do that. It is the surrender of the belief that there is an ego acting to gain liberation from the illusion that is what is to be surrendered. And therefore the whole idea of a gradual process must be surrendered. It can only happen instantaneously in the timeless present, because no other real moment exists except the absolute now. And so when it becomes clear, when the dawn of the light of the recognition that one must surrender all other desires, all desires for the bodily gratifications, the ambitions of the personality, the drives based on social adaptation, and the wish for higher levels of life, even the most beautiful intentions won't pave the way to the eternal present, but will get in the way and keep one creating more karma. Even if it's good karma, it's karma. And to get beyond that illusion There must be a sacrifice even of one's ideal ego image and of the ego ideals that one was given to live as an upright citizen and be an example and a role model. All of that, they're just thoughts. And on the other side, of course, giving up the belief that I'm a failure and a sinner and unworthy and all of that. But whatever sorts of thoughts one is having, whether that one's not worthy of doing it or one is worthy of doing it, that one is what must be dissolved into pure presence. That one is not real. That one does not exist and is the final obstacle to the 0 point, for whom there is no one at all, ever, but the self that is God. You are that. May there be no doubt, no hesitation, no waiting, no maya, no obscuration by false ideas and emotions, and the simple letting go in the here and now into the blissful self that you are.